publishers have a big impact in innovating their models really come down again to that process innovation, and that leads to cultural innovation. Legacy brands still have a ton of cut through in the market.
Welcome to the I Need Coffee and Better Ideas podcast, where we caffeinate your brain with the freshest takes in news media. Buckle up for 10 minutes of rapid fire insights that'll shake up your content game and leave your audience wanting more. Today, I've got Brian Morrissey.
Thanks for having me, Berger. Great to be here.
One thing you mentioned is the efficiency in the organizations, right? We were seeing that left, right, and center newsrooms are being cut. Other parts of the organizations are being cut. I challenged, actually, I won't mention the name of the company, but it's a fairly big-sized German publisher. When I met the CEO at a conference, and maybe he'll hear this and he'll maybe make a comment under our LinkedIn post when he sees this. But I challenged him on what would happen if you just cut everything print today, and you just started your own company again as a startup. What would happen? What would be the consequences of that? And of course, he said, I forget the number of or the percentage of print revenue they had, but it was quite significant. It was in the 60 or 70% of the revenue still came from print. And of course, it's a drastic shift to just say, all right, we're going to cut print, but it's the mentality switch that I was looking for. And he actually alluded to some of the same things you were saying now, like, we cannot do that. First of all, the board would fire me, so I'd be out of a job. Second, it'd be very difficult also because our digital product is just not mature enough yet. What kind of innovation can publishers do on the product side? I think that's a really interesting point where we're seeing some publishers doing a lot, but it comes down to resources. So my question to you is, if you're sort of a mid-tier plus-ish, let's say, publisher, so you're not the New York Times, you're not the Journal, perhaps you're not even the Washington Post, but you're a bit smaller than that, so you don't have endless resources. What do you do? What are the things that you could be leaning into that could perhaps, set yourself up for at least a higher chance of success in the coming, let's say, 5 to 10 years?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think first and foremost, accept the fact that you are not a technology company. I don't, we went through this weird phase where, for a bunch of different reasons, publishers were trying to act like they were tech companies. They'll never be able to attract the level of engineering talent that technology companies will. You're going to have to lean on your partners at the end of the day. The job within the publisher is mostly as a general contractor to gather together the technology specialists. And that's reality. I think where publishers have a big impact in innovating their models really come down again to that process innovation piece. And that leads to cultural innovation. I mean, the fact that German publisher, the fact that you're still talking about print versus digital at a publisher is insane. It's a global phenomenon. Listen to the market. Unless we're going to go into some sort of planned economies, the market is going to give you a lot of feedback, and some of it is going to be harsh. And the market has given feedback that it has rejected a lot of these products, okay? And so to keep leaning on things that you're comfortable with is it's a death sentence. I don't see how you do it. And the idea that you're still talking about print. I mean, look, I was talking with someone here in Serbia. This is like every single market. Like they're talking about like they used to have like the top like newspaper here used to have a circulation of like 340,000. He was telling me, and now it's like 30,000. Okay, the entire newspaper circulation is 340,000 across the entire country, is what he was telling me. I have to fact check these. But again, I think that this is a time, and just in my conversations with a lot of publishing leaders, it's time to dispense with the nostalgia and also the small c conservatism that exists to me. I mean, obviously this is painting with a broad brush, but within a lot of publishing organizations in particular. And that's a cultural resistance to change and to doing things. And like, when you suggest, oh, well, maybe we should try these new payment methods. Oh, that'll never work. And it's time to, yes, get back to basics and being very audience focused, but it's also a time to really rethink. I mean, in Silicon Valley, they talk about first principles thinking, but within these organizations, there is a need to really take out a blank sheet and to rethink how they structure these businesses. And that's why, look, this is a good time to be a new publishing model versus an old publishing model, because you're not carrying around the legacy baggage. You're not carrying around the legacy infrastructure, and you're starting from scratch. Okay. But the reality is, for most publishers, they're going to have to retool their entire businesses on the fly while operating, declining businesses at the end of the day. And you can either manage decline, and that's a choice, or you can use those declining businesses in order to build what the businesses of the future are going to be, and they're going to be very different than the businesses of the past.
For sure. And if I started a media company today, I sure as hell wouldn't started with a print product, probably.
No, probably not. But I will say this, there are a lot of advantages to the legacy brands. I think what we're seeing is digital media created a lot of brands, but they were very flimsy. And legacy brands still have a ton of cut through in the market. Now, the roles of those brands are completely changing. I mean, I always say, like, a lot of the media business is a front business for different types of businesses. I was in my world tour, I stopped off in Paris, and Vogue World had taken over this part of Paris. Is like almost like impossible to they just refuse to allow private companies to take it over. But I guess Anna Wintour knows some people, and the role of that brand is going to be completely different, right? And the fact more of these publishing brands are going to be leaning on the strength of that brand in order to master new skills in things like events and
magazine. I mean, what's happened at times since Jess Sibley took over? I mean, just the shift in year and a half since she started.
It's an events company. At the end of the day, I mean, it's a brand, right? But the publishing product, I'm sure Jess and Mark will hate me for saying this, but the publishing product itself is just one part of that business, right? They're not betting that the future of that business certainly on ad pages in that magazine, but the red border has real value in the market and in culture. And so when they say it's a B2B business, it gets a lot of hackles from various newsletter type people, not me. But the reality is they know who they are, right? They're not going to have a massive subscription business for time. They're going to pop up every now and again. They can still get Taylor Swift. They can still get Donald Trump. They can still get Joe Biden. They'll probably have the Dalai Lama too. Does he still give interviews? He got semi-canceled a little bit, but didn't everyone? Yeah. But they use that in order to create a lot of value in the marketplace for where they make money, which often is in brand activations and events and franchise tent poles. I mean, this in some ways is a modified Forbes model where Jess and Mark Howard, that's who I was referring to, the president, where they came from. So it's no surprise. I mean, people have playbooks, and I think it's a good playbook.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm very impressed by what's happened at Time, and I think it's quite the shift. They decided. I saw on LinkedIn yesterday. It was the 1 year anniversary of dropping down the paywall at Time. So they put up a paywall, and then just took it down after about 6 months, and now they've been sort of.
Berger, it reminds me of I would always in our newsroom at Digiday, I remind people there's no publishing industry really. I mean, there is an industry, but it's these businesses are all very different, and the brands are very different, and the approaches you take are very different. And a lot of times within journalism, we have to generalize when everything is very specific. It's the reason why I think I've moderated 1 trillion panels in my life, and I've retired recently from that. But I would always ban to say, well, it depends on client objectives. And I'm because of course it does. But that is true, right? And I think it applies to these publishing brands because there's no singular approach, and you have to be honest about who you are and where your place is in the market, and what the market values you for. And it might be different than what you want, right? Like, so take like a Bustle, right? Like, I mean, Brian Goldberg, I actually really give Brian a lot of credit for the fact that he built Bleacher Report with Dave and with others, to, based on like SEO. They were really good at getting traffic from SEO, and they were good at like, he's great at operating these businesses off spreadsheets, right? That business at Bustle basically disappeared. It's in terminal decline, and he's changed that business substantially. He's bought real brands, and he is, it's the Nylon House is, throwing parties at Art Basel is now a bigger part of that business, right? And that's where the future is. It's a different business, and operating it is completely different than operating an SEO focused publishing model.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot to sort of dive into here, and hopefully we can get you back on the podcast at some point in the future. There's a couple more questions I wanted to dive into, because you left, and like you said, you're now building your own brand, and since then you've launched one of the most successful newsletters in the industry. What would sort of be your one or two hot tips for any publisher who's going to start a newsletter? Or enhance their newsletter game? What's sort of led to your success over the past few years that you sort of, okay, this was a really good move by me or by us that we did here?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't really I am not a big believer in newsletter businesses for the most part. I think newsletters are a good tool. I think they're a great minimally viable product, right? There are a lot of advantages to it in that you don't need to build a CMS. You don't need to worry about a lot of SEO and a lot of the blocking and tackling that are a reality of web-based publishing. So it's great. And you have a quote unquote direct connection with your audience. And I say in quotes because the reality is you're intermediated by technology, distribution, and interfaces, no matter what you do, right? So you'll get shoved into the promotions tab. AI is going to summarize your newsletter, and that's just how it works. But I think the biggest thing with newsletters as a product is to use them for what they're best for. So I try to use newsletters I take a more conversational tone sort of strategically in them, because you're invading an inbox. It's another publishing hack, right? The email was never meant as a publishing medium, right? It was a communication medium. So if you're not being as, you have to be native to the environment, right? And so I think that's critical too. Too often publishers have used newsletters to send people basically web pages at the end of the day, links to get people to the web page, because the web page was where they showed them ads and all this other stuff. And I'm not really a giant believer in that. I mean, I think you have to provide value within the actual email itself. This isn't sort of revolutionary. And that's because what email is good at is building habit. And that's really the name of the game in publishing now. So it's a great tool, but it's really just a tool. I mean, I'm a big believer in, I do podcasts. Yeah. I do in-person events. And to me, like, that's the reason I'm not like a giant believer in newsletter businesses, because just like you said, you have to diversify. And for individuals or publishers who are only just focused on newsletters, like, it's going to work for some, but that would make me nervous. Things come and go with their popularity. newsletters are have been all the rage for a couple of years, and ultimately, that wears out, and it's better to have other options. And the reality is, most people in your audience don't necessarily, want your content or, in one form, right? So, it's better to master a few. I mean, you can't do everything, but that's why, I try to do, podcasting and in person, because I think I can do those well.
Yes, and you sure as hell do those well as well. So rounding off, how many coffees per day do you have?
I try to keep it to 2.
That's good. All right, Ryan, thank you so much. And I look forward to see you somewhere in the world, hopefully not too distant future.
Cool.
All right, thank you.